Hey, welcome back to Virtual Vertex. In today's video we're going to be taking a look at PBR materials and breaking them down into their individual texture maps. Now without further ado, let's get into it. So now we're inside of Substance Painter, let's discuss what a PBR material is. So first of all, PBR stands for physically based rendering. Now what do we mean by physically based rendering? Physically based rendering means that the material replicates how light would interact with a similar material or the same material within the real world. Now this isn't going to make it 100% accurate, hence the based part of physically based rendering, but you can get it extremely close to the real world replication of that material that you can't even notice in most cases when done correctly. So what are the benefits of a PBR pipeline and why is it now integrated across multiple 3D industries from games to films or animation? The PBR pipeline was created to improve the creation of photorealistic materials. In addition to this, it would help optimize production pipelines. The main benefit to a PBR material is that you only need to create one material that will work with multiple lighting environments and different scenarios. Previously, technical artists or material artists would have to go in and tweak the materials so that they would behave as expected in different lighting scenarios. So to quickly show a PBR material in different lighting scenarios, we've got a material of a train track with some pathways on the side here. I'm gonna swap out the environment lighting, so currently we're in a forest. And you can instantly see how the material interacts and changes based on the light scenario without me having to go in and manually change things like roughness and the metallic values. Now we know what a PBR material is and what it aims to do, we're going to break down a material into its individual texture sets and explain and discuss what the purpose of each one is. Cut 9 re-recording. So what texture maps do you need when creating a PBR material? So first of all we have the base color. This can also be known as the albedo or diffuse, depending on what texturing program or game engine you're in. We also have the height or displacement map. We have the roughness map, metallic map, normal map, and then the ambient occlusion map. So let's start off by looking at the first one, which would be base color. Now what is base color? Base color is the texture that holds all of the color information for your material. So if we can see the tracks here, if we switch to view only the base color channel, you can see we lose a lot of the detail, but it holds all of the color information. Now if we go back to material, if we remove the base color, you can see this is how it would look. So obviously a vital part of a PBR material. The next texture map we're going to be looking at is the metal map or metallic map. So the metallic map defines what part of the material is metal, so therefore has metallic properties, and what does not, so therefore does not have metallic properties. So an example of this is the tracks here we'd expect to be white because they're metal, and then the stone and wood would be black. A grayscale color in between is rarely used unless you have something like a rusted metal, so it wouldn't have full metallic properties, it would be somewhere in between. So that's an example of where you'd use a value between black and white. So if we switch our material over to the metallic now, we can see, as I said, the tracks themselves, which are metal, are white, again with a bit of grayscale where there would be rust. So if we zoom in, we can see where there was grey, there's a rusted kind of texture going on the track itself. And then the wooden tracks and stone are all black. Moving on to the roughness texture map. So what is a roughness texture map? So the roughness texture map basically holds the data or information that represents how much the light is distributed once it's hit the surface. So if it's distributed more, you'll have a more matte look, whereas if it's distributed perfectly, you'll have a more mirrored effect on the texture. Now to show that, we'll look at this simple plane and adjust the roughness values. So with a roughness value of 0 or a black colored texture, it has a perfect mirrored reflection of the environment. Whereas if we move closer to a value of 1, we can see how the effect of the light is being dispersed across the whole material till eventually there's no reflection and it's completely dispersed into one color. Now I've got a foil metal material set up here, so we can see, for example, if we adjust the value up to 1, closer to white or 1, we can see how less and less light is being directly reflected and it's being more and more dispersed. And then the opposite if we go down to a value of 0. So if I switch this over to the roughness map, so we can see how that is affected. Again, as we go down, it gets darker. And then again, in the opposite direction, we can see a whiter value, and then again, that represents the light becoming more and more dispersed from the rougher material. So now we've looked at roughness, the next texture map we're going to look at is the normal map. Now, what is the normal map? If I switch over to it here on the viewer, so the purpose of a normal map is to create fake lighting details, so shows bumps and dents on the texture without actually having to model them. So it essentially tells how the light would interact with the surface. So where there's a crevice, there'll be more shadows, vice versa. And normal maps are extremely powerful in that it gives you an extra way to increase the fidelity and detail of your textures or models, but without having to actually model the details on, therefore reducing the amount of overall polygons needed for your mesh, and therefore more optimization. So if we go back to the material now, and then we can, if we switch the normal map off, you can see how it adds much more detail in the crevices in between the rocks. So if we get a bit closer, you can see it looks like a small, but it actually adds a lot to making it look real. Now let's look at that from a different material so we can see it. So here I've turned the height map up so there's no displacement to better represent how much detail a normal would add. So without normal, you can see that it's very flat, and then we add the normal in. You can see you get a lot more micro detail in the detail on the stone and bricks. So now we've looked at normal maps, we're going to look at height maps, also known as displacement maps, and see how they work. So again, at height maps, if we turn it on here, we'll go to the height map channel. See, it works again like with many of the other textures on a 0 to 1 value, so between black and white. And what that means is the lighter the value, or whiter the color between black and white, the more displacement you'll see on the texture. So then if we go back to see the full material, we can see how with that information, the texture's been... So with that information, we can see how the material has been displaced and added extra geometry. So if we switch that off, you see it becomes flat. All the detail that we're getting now is only coming from the normal map. Then we add it on, we can get some really awesome looking detail on our textures. However, this is a lot more of an intensive process. So for example, if you're working in a game, it wouldn't always be used depending on what kind of systems you're aiming for. So like for a world, generally you wouldn't use the height map, you'd stick with using normals for optimization purposes. Finally, we're going to be taking a look at the ambient occlusion texture map. Now, what is an ambient occlusion map? Well, an ambient occlusion is used to emulate the look of true global illumination by using the texture map to calculate the extent to which an area of the material is occluded or prevented from receiving incoming light. Essentially what this means is that dark crevices and areas have more light blocked to them, so therefore will be darker, and then more open surfaces, so straight on, will be brighter and more exposed to the environmental light. So if we look at our brick material that we have here, and we turn the ambient occlusion off and on, so here it's off, we look at the crevices, we'll turn it on, and you can see how it adds a little bit more depth and blocks a bit more light from getting into those crevices. So what that texture looks like is this. So again, it's black and white values, so the whiter values are more exposed and receive more of the incoming light, and the darker values do the complete opposite, so they reduce the amount of light that the material receives. So that pretty much sums up everything you need to know about a PBR material and the different textures used to create them. Obviously, I'm pretty sure by now a lot of you have realized that you're already using a PBR workflow, especially if you're using texturing programs such as Substance Painter or Quixel Suite. Obviously, it's still extremely important to understand what a PBR material is and the different textures used to create them. Reasons for this: if you have any issues with your material that you need to troubleshoot, whether that be how reflective it is, if it's a metallic or not, you'll know what specific texture to look into first and troubleshoot. If you have any questions on anything regarding the video or would like me to do a more in-depth video tutorial on specific texture maps, drop a comment below. I'm also working on setting up a Discord channel where you can interact with other artists, be them new or experienced, where we can share our knowledge and ideas with each other. There'll also be a section where you can suggest video tutorials that you'll be looking for in the future. Again, thanks for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe to keep up to date for when the next tutorials and lessons drop.